From fugitives who evaded police for 7 years in the Australian bush, to manhunts costing millions with zero results, to cases that changed the nation's laws forever. These are the 10 most dramatic manhunts in Australian history. Some lasted years, some ended in hours, some are still unsolved, and one is happening right now. I'm ranking these not by duration or cost, but by sheer drama, the impact on the public, the intensity of the pursuit, and the failures that let them happen. Number 10 might surprise you, but number 1, it's still unfolding as we speak. Let's start with a case that terrified international travelers and exposed the dangers of Australia's vast outback. Number 10, the Peter Falconio murder and the hunt for Bradley Murdoch. In July 2001, British tourists Peter Falconio and Joanne Lees were travelling along the Stuart Highway in the Northern Territory, one of the most remote roads in Australia. A man flagged them down, claiming there was a problem with their vehicle. When Peter went to check, Joanne heard a gunshot. The man attacked her, but she managed to escape and hide in the bush for 5 hours before flagging down a truck. Peter's body was never found, but Joanne's testimony led police to Bradley Murdoch, a drug runner who knew the outback intimately. The manhunt lasted 2 years. Murdoch was finally arrested in South Australia in 2003 and convicted in 2005. This case is dramatic because it exposed how vulnerable travellers are in Australia's remote areas. The Stuart Highway stretches for thousands of kilometres with virtually no population. If something happens out there, you're completely alone. And the fact that Peter's body has never been recovered, despite extensive searches, shows just how vast and unforgiving the Australian outback can be. Murdoch is serving a life sentence, but Peter Falconio's family has never had closure. Number 9. Ivan Milat and the backpacker murders. Between 1989 and 1992, 7 young backpackers disappeared while hitchhiking near Sydney. Their bodies were found in Belanglo State Forest, south of Sydney, buried in shallow graves. The victims were Australian, British, and German tourists. All had been brutally murdered. The manhunt intensified in 1993 when police received a crucial tip. A British backpacker named Paul Onions had escaped from a man who'd picked him up hitchhiking and pulled a gun on him. Onions identified Ivan Milat from a photo lineup. Police raided Milat's home in 1994 and found camping equipment and weapons belonging to the victims. Milat was arrested and later convicted of 7 murders. What makes this case so dramatic is the international attention it received. Australia's reputation as a safe destination for backpackers was shattered, and the Belanglo Forest became synonymous with horror. Ivan Milat died in prison in 2019. Still maintaining his innocence despite overwhelming evidence. But questions remain. Were there more victims? Was Milat's family involved? To this day, the full truth has never emerged. This case changed how Australia viewed its own safety and forced police to take missing persons cases more seriously. Number 8. The Anita Cobby murder and the manhunt for 5 killers. On February 2, 1986, 26-year-old nurse Anita Cobby was abducted while walking home from Blacktown railway station in Sydney. What happened next was so brutal that the judge suppressed many details during the trial. Anita was gang-raped and murdered by 5 men: John Travers, Michael Murdoch, Les Murphy, Gary Murphy, and Michael Murphy. The manhunt was intense. New South Wales police knew they were looking for multiple offenders based on evidence at the scene. Within days, tips started coming in. All 5 men were arrested within 2 weeks of the murder. They were sentenced to life imprisonment without parole, at the time the harshest sentence available in Australia. This case is dramatic because of the sheer brutality and the public outrage that followed. The murder of Anita Cobby became a symbol of the worst of human cruelty. It also changed Australia's justice system. The case led to reforms in how violent offenders are sentenced and sparked debate about the death penalty. which had been abolished in Nest dollars in 1955. John Travers, the ringleader, remains in prison. The Murphy brothers have all died in custody. Michael Murdoch also died in prison. Anita's father, Gary Lynch, became an advocate for victims' rights and against parole for violent offenders. This wasn't the longest manhunt, but it was one of the most impactful. An entire nation was traumatized by what happened to Anita Cobby. Number 7, the Lint Cafe Siege and Manhunts. This wasn't a traditional manhunt, it was a siege. But it belongs on this list because of the intensity, the live coverage, and the questions about why Moniz was free in the first place. On December 15, 2014, Manhunts Moniz walked into the Lint Chocolate Cafe in Sydney's Martin Place, right in the heart of the city's financial district, and took 18 people hostage. For 16 hours, the siege played out on live television. The entire nation watched. Sydney's CBD was locked down. Armed police surrounded the cafe. At 2 a.m. on December 16th, police stormed the cafe after hearing gunshots inside. 2 hostages were killed: Tory Johnson, the cafe manager, and Katrina Dawson, a barrister. Moniz was shot dead by police. Here's what makes this so dramatic. Manhunts Moniz should never have been on the streets. He was on bail for being an accessory to his ex-wife's murder. He'd been charged with dozens of sexual assault offences. He'd sent hate mail to families of Australian soldiers killed in Afghanistan, yet he was free. And he walked into a cafe in the middle of Sydney with a shotgun. The siege raised fundamental questions about Australia's bail system, about how the justice system handles violent offenders, and about whether warning signs were ignored. 2 innocent people died because systems failed, and the manhunt, in a sense, should have happened years earlier, before Moniz was ever in that position to harm anyone. Number 6. The Claremont serial killer and the 20-year manhunt for Bradley Edwards. Between 1996 and 1997, 3 young women disappeared from the affluent suburb of Claremont in Perth. Western Australia. Sarah Spears, 18, vanished in January 1996. Her body has never been found. Jane Rimmer, 23, disappeared in June 1996. Her body was found in bushland, south of Perth. Ciara Glennon, 27, disappeared in March 1997. Her body was found north of Perth. All 3 women had been out at night in Claremont. All 3 simply vanished. Perth was gripped with fear. Parents warned their daughters. Women stopped going out alone. The Claremont area, once seen as safe and upscale, became associated with terror. Western Australia Police launched one of the state's largest investigations. But years passed with no arrests. Then, in 2016, nearly 20 years after the last murder, police arrested Bradley Edwards, a former Telstra technician. DNA evidence connected him to the crimes. Edwards was convicted in 2020 of murdering Jane Rimmer and Ciara Glennon. He was acquitted of Sarah Spears' murder due to lack of evidence, though police believe he's responsible. What makes this manhunt so dramatic is the time it took. 20 years. An entire generation grew up in Perth knowing about the Claremont killer, but not knowing who he was. And the answer: he was living among them the whole time, working a normal job, raising a family, hiding in plain sight. This case shows that even with modern forensics, some killers can evade justice for decades. Number 5. The Snowtown Murders and the Hunt for John Bunting's Killing Crew. Between 1992 and 1999, 11 people were murdered in South Australia in what became known as the Bodies in Barrels murders. The ringleader was John Bunting, assisted primarily by Robert Wagner and James Vlasakis. They targeted people they considered undesirable, drug users, pedophiles, and others they deemed unworthy of life. But many of their victims were simply vulnerable people who crossed their path. Some were mentally disabled. Some were their own family members. The murders were discovered in May 1999 when police, searching for a missing person, found 8 bodies in barrels of acid in a disused bank vault in Snowtown, a small town north of Adelaide. 3 more bodies were found in other locations. One victim has never been found. John Bunting and Robert Wagner were arrested and later convicted. They're both serving life sentences without parole. What makes this case so dramatic and disturbing is the systematic nature of the killings. This wasn't a momentary act of violence. Bunting operated for 7 years, convincing others to help him, justifying the murders as some kind of vigilante justice. And the location, a bank vault in a small rural town. The barrels were there for months before being discovered. This is Australia's worst serial killing case in terms of victim count. And it exposed how vulnerable people, those without strong family connections or social support, can disappear without anyone really looking for them. The Snowtown murders remain a dark chapter in South Australian history. Number 4. Gino and Mark Stocko, the father and son outlaws who evaded police for 8 years across 3 states. Gino and Mark Stocko were wanted for a string of crimes: armed robbery, firearms offences, theft. But in 2013, they shot at police during a pursuit. And in 2015, they murdered a caretaker on a property they'd been squatting on. For 8 years, the Stockos lived off the grid. They moved between New South Wales, Victoria and Queensland, stealing vehicles, breaking into properties and surviving in the bush. They became known as modern bushrangers. Police called them armed and dangerous. Communities in rural areas were terrified. The Stockos were known to break into homes while the owners were away. The manhunt involved multiple police forces, helicopters, and extensive resources. But the Stockos knew the bush intimately. They moved constantly. They were always one step ahead. In October 2015, police finally caught them in a dramatic arrest near Doondoo, in Tidwell. Both were armed when captured. Gino Stocko died in custody in 2023. Mark Stocko is serving a life sentence for the murder of Rosario Cimoni, the caretaker they killed. What makes this manhunt so dramatic is the father-son element. This wasn't a lone fugitive. It was 2 people who'd chosen this life together, operating as a team, supporting each other in evading capture for nearly a decade, and the fact that they committed murder while on the run elevated this from a property crime case to something far more serious. The Stocko case showed that even in modern Australia, with all our technology and resources, determined fugitives who know the land can disappear for years. Number 3. Malcolm Naden, the man who became a shadow. Malcolm Naden is accused of 2 murders: his cousin Christy Scholes in 2005 and Letitia Nolan in 2005. He's also accused of the sexual assault of a 15-year-old girl. After being questioned by police in 2005, Naden disappeared into the rugged bushland around Gloucester in New South Wales. For 7 years, he lived in the bush. Not in a house, not in a town, in the wilderness. Police conducted extensive searches. They offered a $250,000 reward, at the time the largest in Nenesadula's history. They deployed helicopters, dogs, and specialist trackers, but Naden was always gone by the time they arrived. He left no trace. Locals called him the Shadow because he was impossible to catch. In 2012, he shot a police officer during a confrontation in the bush. The officer survived, but the shooting intensified the manhunt even further. Finally, in March 2012, police captured Naden at a remote property. He'd broken in looking for supplies. When police surrounded him, he gave up without a fight. After 7 years, the Shadow was finally caught. Malcolm Naden was convicted of murder and assault in 2013. He's serving a life sentence. What makes this manhunt so dramatic is the sheer length and the near-mythical status Naden achieved. 7 years in the bush, surviving winters, evading hundreds of police officers. Some people in the area believed he had help. Others thought he'd become so skilled at bushcraft that he was untraceable. The truth is probably simpler. He knew the land better than police did. And in that terrain, knowledge is everything. The Malcolm Naden case is the longest manhunt in Nenesadula's history. And it proved that even in the 21st century, The Australian bush can still hide someone who knows how to survive. Number 2. Ned Kelly, the outlaw who became a legend. Now, this is a 19th century case, but it belongs on this list because it's the most famous manhunt in Australian history. And the drama, the homemade armor, the final shootout, the folklore that followed is unmatched. Ned Kelly and his gang operated in Victoria between 1878 and 1880. They robbed banks, they killed police officers, and they became folk heroes to many people who saw them as fighting against an oppressive colonial system. The Victoria Police manhunt for Kelly was extensive. Rewards were offered, trackers were deployed. But Kelly had support in rural communities, and the police struggled to penetrate the network protecting him. On June 28, 1880, the Kelly gang took over the town of Glenrowan, holding dozens of hostages. They planned to derail a police train and kill the officers on board, but police were tipped off. They surrounded the pub where the gang was holed up. A siege began. In one of the most iconic moments in Australian history, Ned Kelly emerged from the pub wearing homemade armor made from plough metal. Police shot him repeatedly, but the armor protected his torso. He was finally brought down by shots to his legs. 3 members of the gang died in the pub. Kelly survived, was tried, and hanged in November 1880. His last words were reportedly, "Such is life." The Ned Kelly manhunt is dramatic, not just because of the armor and the shootout, but because of what it represented. To this day, Australians debate whether Kelly was a criminal or a rebel, a murderer or a victim of injustice. His story has been told in countless books, films, and songs. The suit of armor he wore is displayed in the State Library of Victoria. No other Australian outlaw has achieved the legendary status of Ned Kelly, and no other manhunt has been so embedded in the national mythology. But there's one manhunt happening right now that might rival it. And that brings us to number 1. Number 1, Dezi Freeman. The manhunt that's still happening. On August 24, 2025, Victoria Police sent 10 officers to execute a search warrant at Dezi Freeman's property in Porapunka, in Victoria's Alpine region. Within minutes, 2 officers were dead. Senior Constable Vadim Dewart Hotart and Detective Leading Senior Constable Neil Thompson. A 3rd officer was seriously wounded. Freeman disappeared into the surrounding bushland, and he hasn't been seen since. Victoria Police launched what has become the most expensive and extensive manhunt in Australian history. At its peak, 500 officers were deployed, helicopters, drones, thermal imaging. The Australian Defence Force provided assistance. A $1 million reward was offered, one of the largest in Victoria's history. 2 months later, 200 officers are still searching. They've covered over 40 square kilometres of rugged terrain. The public has provided 1,400 tips to police, and according to Victoria Police Chief Commissioner Mike Bush, they have produced 0 useful leads. In a recent press conference, Bush admitted something extraordinary. When asked about the search, he said, quote, "Is he still alive? We don't know. After 2 months, millions of dollars, hundreds of officers, and advanced technology, Victoria Police doesn't even know if Freeman is alive or dead." Why does this manhunt rank number 1? Because it's happening right now. Because it's unprecedented in scale and cost. And because it represents a complete failure of police intelligence, tactical planning, and investigative capability. 10 officers were sent to serve a warrant on someone described as having anti-government views and a history with firearms. No tactical support, no proper risk assessment. The result, 2 dead officers. And a fugitive who's been impossible to find. Freeman is described as an experienced outdoorsman who knew the Victorian high country intimately. Whether he's still alive, whether he's still in the area, or whether he escaped in those first critical hours while police were organizing their response, no one knows. This manhunt has everything: drama, mystery, massive resources. Complete failure to produce results, and unlike every other case on this list, this one has no ending yet. Will Freeman be found? Will he be found alive? Or will this become another Malcolm Naden case? Years of searching for someone who's mastered the art of disappearing into the Australian bush. Only time will tell. But right now, the Dezi Freeman manhunt is the most dramatic, the most expensive, and the most unsuccessful in modern Australian history. From Ned Kelly's homemade armour in 1880 to Dezi Freeman vanishing in 2025, these 10 manhunts show a pattern. The Australian landscape, whether it's the outback, the bush or the forests, can hide people for years if they know how to survive. Police resources, no matter how extensive, can't always overcome knowledge of the land, and some cases expose fundamental failures in how threats are assessed and operations are planned. The manhunt for Dezi Freeman is still active. If you have any information about his whereabouts, Victoria Police is offering a $1 million reward. But based on the pattern of these cases, if Freeman is alive and knows the terrain, he could remain free for years. What do you think? Which of these manhunts is the most dramatic? And do you think Freeman will ever be found? Leave your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for updates on the Freeman case and more Australian true crime.